Hello and welcome to the Future Food Finance podcast. We've got another cracking guest. We're speaking to Sean Smith, the chief exec of the biopesticides firm Eden Research. He's got lots of news. He updates us on Eden's latest biopesticide treatment and what stage. It's quite a complicated regulatory process, but it's interesting, and he talks us through all that. He also talks about a recent fundraise and gives us a bit of a trading update, and also gives us an overview of where we are 2024 in the biopesticide market. So that's coming up. Tune in. Please remember to subscribe to the podcast on YouTube and Spotify, and do check in every week to get the latest on the publicly listed companies, how they're performing on the Future Food Finance website. Hello and welcome to the Future Food Finance podcast. My name is John Reynolds, the host. This week we have a returning guest who is Sean Smith, the CEO of the AIM-listed biopesticides firm Eden Research, who has come back because he's got a Santa sack full of news. So thanks a million for joining us, Sean. You're very welcome. So for those who don't know Eden Research, just give us a very quick overview, please.
Well, good morning, John, and thank you very much for the invitation to come back and speak. Just at a high level, Eden Research is an AIM-listed company focused very much on sustainable solutions across three major industries. Our primary focus today is on plant health or crop protection, where we develop sustainable biopesticides that are used in professional agriculture and horticultural applications. The products that we're developing are all based on natural chemistry, where we're harnessing the power of plants to help the same plants, in some cases, defend themselves against bacterial, fungal diseases, as well as insect pests, and more recently against predation by birds when seeds are planted.
Okay, that's fantastic. So there's lots to talk about. So let's start with the product news first of all. So you filed for regulatory approval for your seed treatment, Ecovelex, I think it's the correct pronunciation.
That's right, yeah.
In the UK and the EU. And you've also announced Ecovelex's first customer. So just because people won't be kind of fully up to speed on this. So just tell us in kind of simple lay language what Ecovelex is, and I guess it's more efficacious than traditional pesticides.
No, it's a great question. So Ecovelex is a seed treatment. It's actually a component of a seed treatment, and certainly people may not be aware that seeds used in professional agriculture, but also in some cases in home and garden applications, often are treated with a coating, and that coating contains a whole bunch of different components. They actually look very simple, but they're not. They contain ingredients that help that seed effectively get the best start in life humanly possible. Or can you say humanly possible when talking about a seed? Anyway, the point is that they contain things such as nutrition products, biostimulants, plant growth regulators, insecticides, fungicides, and in the case of Ecovelex, bird repellents. So people may not be aware, but seeds are one of the farmer's most expensive inputs into the process. And as such, if you're a farmer and you plant 100 seeds, you definitely want 100 to come up, and you don't want to be spending your hard-earned money to feed the birds. And nobody would be surprised to know that birds love seeds. If you've got a feeder in your back garden, you'll recognize that very quickly. With Ecovelex, we have been focused initially on maize because birds love maize, and the main target here is just to simply help to repel birds, to stop them from basically plucking the seeds out of the ground and reducing a farmer's yield. To give you a sense of the scale of the problem there, a farmer can lose 20, 30, 40, 50% even of their crop if there is very severe bird predation. And so you can imagine that goes right to their bottom line if they're having to double the amount of seed that they're planting in order to get the same ultimate output. That's one thing, but in doing so, they're increasing their costs quite dramatically. So that becomes impractical pretty much immediately. So this is the focus with Ecovelex, and it's a product we've developed jointly with Corteva Agriscience, using Corteva's market knowledge and market access and extremely robust development capabilities, and using Eden's technology. So here we're leveraging Eden's plant-derived natural ingredients and our formulation delivery technology, which is derived from yeast. So it's a natural solution all by itself, coupled together with the active ingredients. And we're effectively repelling birds and helping farmers to get the most out of their investment.
Okay, that's very well explained. So it effectively creates a kind of an unpleasant taste that kind of repels the birds, I guess.
That's exactly it. Yeah.
So just talk about Corteva Agriscience. So you're manufacturing it jointly with them, and they're actually your first customer. That's right, is it?
Yeah. So Eden is manufacturing the product and supplying it to Corteva. But to take a step back, based on your question, Corteva is the combined agri-science business of Dow and DuPont. So when those behemoths merged a number of years ago, they combined their agri-science business interests in the form of Corteva and spun that out as a separate company. And so Corteva is, in fact, the world's largest agri-science pure play. They are active everywhere from the breeding and production of seeds all the way through to crop protection products and an increasing range of different services that they're providing to industry. They are considered, I guess, historically to be one of the major players globally. They're one of the largest seed companies in the world, and they are making very significant investments in sustainable chemistry for crop protection. And Ecovelex is a very good example of that. We've also broadened out our relationship with them in France, and we hope to see that relationship continue to broaden out, where we are basically working with them based on their very strong access to the market, their very clear expertise, and their ability to serve customers very effectively globally.
Okay, so that's great. So just tell us, because people might be difficult to get their head around. So Corteva are your first customer. So you've got a customer, although you've not got regulatory approval, but I guess you're confident that you will get regulatory approval then.
Yeah, John, I mean, regulatory is a huge issue for us in the crop protection industry. It's one of the most highly regulated industries around the world. So when we look at the EU, the European authorities require us to not only prove that the active ingredients that we're using and the formulation components that we're using are safe for the environment, safe for animals, safe for human use, for exposure to humans, and also for human consumption. We have to prove all of those things, and then on top of that, we have to prove that the product works. And so the regulators are asking us to submit multiple years worth of data to say, right, the product actually works and it's safe, and that there's a need for the product in the industry. So regulatory is all important for us, and I often say that regulatory is a bit of a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it is the rate limiting step for us in terms of bringing new products to market. The regulatory clearance is what defines the size of our addressable market, and yet on the other side of that sword is the opportunities that it creates for products like ours and technology like ours. Regulatory pressures are removing products from the market, and that is absolutely the driver behind Ecovelex. Corteva identified a real need in the bird repellent seed treatment market based on the fact that the incumbent product that does the same job is being effectively forced out of the market. It's already been banned in a number of countries, and that list of countries is set to expand over the next few years as regulators are trying to drive the industry towards more sustainable solutions. So what we've done with Corteva is we've developed a product that's equally effective, but that it has far fewer problems associated with its use. Corteva in this context has been our development partner. We develop the product, but they're helping us develop it for its use in the market. And what's important to note is they are our exclusive distribution partner in Europe and the UK for Ecovelex, and potentially in the future we'll be talking about other markets as well.
Right, okay, that's really interesting. So you kind of touched on a point which I think is interesting. Can you just talk more broadly about the pesticide market? Because you touched on that issue about banning products. I saw a story which might be, from what you say, kind of out of date in The Guardian newspaper recently, which was headlined, "The UK fails to ban 36 harmful pesticides, which are outlawed for use in the EU," which I thought was an interesting story. And the story was kind of pitched as Britain being the toxic poster child of Europe. And it was saying that the UK had failed to ban 36 pesticides, which are not allowed for use in the EU. But from what you're saying, kind of things are changing. Or is there a big discrepancy between the UK and the EU market when it comes to outlawing pesticides then?
Yeah. Just to speak broadly about regulatory and different approaches at different, let's say, regulators around the world, but certainly across Europe as a whole, and certainly with the UK and the EU, there are different approaches that are being taken by regulators. In the EU, there is meant to be a harmonized approach to regulation, and that each member state should be taking the same approach as the next. That's in theory. In practice, each member state has some latitude to address their own commercial and economic concerns, as well as their own local environmental concerns. And so there is flexibility in that. The UK post-Brexit has seemingly made it known that they will take their own view on regulation. That's one of the I guess potential benefits from Brexit, at least that were envisioned, and they are establishing their own set of rules and approaches to product regulation. And so I think the characterization there is a little bit of a challenge in terms of that article. I know which article you're talking about, but keep in mind, this isn't unique to the UK. There's a historic tension between what the regulators are trying to achieve in terms of human health, safety, environmental safety, et cetera, and food chain security, and the requirements of farmers being, to produce as much or more with the same amount of land. And it's a very, I can't emphasize this point enough, it is a extremely complex issue that takes into account everything from carbon emissions through to food security, land use management, human health and safety, and the presence of potentially problematic chemicals in the environment. So it is hugely complicated. I don't envy the job that the regulators are doing, and yet at the same time, we very much believe that we're making it easier for them by using plant-derived sustainable chemistry that's present in the environment naturally. It should be easier, and it'd be nice to see that the regulatory mechanisms, not just in the UK, but globally, adapt a bit more and treat sustainable products with a bit more of a favorable approach to help us get these new products to market. If you ask a farmer what's their big challenge, the big challenge isn't that the regulators are removing the sort of incumbent products from the market. And that's happening, by the way. You mentioned 36 different chemicals that have been removed from the market in Europe. The list is far longer than that. And the list of products to come is even longer than that. The challenge is approving replacements for those. And it's a really simple thing. And I've seen a number of different groups make comments such as, well, we should just be banning pesticides altogether. Well, that's really impractical. I'm sorry to say, it's also profoundly naive to believe that that's possible. The issue with that isn't in the interest of the industry. It's in the interest of society as a whole, and generally speaking, for the planet. So the solution for me is not to ban pesticides; it's to adopt increasingly more sustainable approaches. And, what we're trying to do is give growers the tools to do that. And just as in human health, what we're seeing happen in crop protection is an adoption of a much more, let's say, holistic approach. In other words, it's not just the one conventional chemistry that's been used for 30 years that solves the problems. It may be a combination of two different types of approaches, one sustainable and one based on more conventional chemistry. Again, it's taking a more informed, more considered approach so that we can continue to take these steps towards a sustainable food production system.
Okay, that's great. So just last point on Ecovelex. So you're waiting, I guess, I don't know, how does it work with regulators? I guess you get kind of feedback, do you? And then you have to amend your application process.
Yes.
Forgive me if I've got this wrong. There's something called an emergency use authorization. So this is kind of like to use a kind of aeroplane analogy, kind of like a speedy boarding. So you're hoping to get quick approval, but this is at the behest of the farmers, is it?
Yeah, absolutely. So across Europe, but also in the UK and a number of countries around the world, there is this mechanism, and in fact, probably the one that the general listener who's not a specialist in crop protection would recall the approvals that were granted for vaccines going through the pandemic. Not to recall an unpleasant time, but emergency authorizations were granted for those in a number of countries around the world as we were coming to grips with dealing with the problem. An emergency use permit in crop protection is not massively dissimilar. So there's a process that exists outside of the normal regulatory process where the regulators will look at farming requests from farmers to help them solve the problem for a short term while full authorizations are being considered by the regulators. So it's meant to be a bit of a fast track. They're temporary, so they last for 120 days, and really they are granted on the request of farmers in most countries around, well, certainly across Europe, where a farming group will make a request to the regulator to say, please, can we have use of this product? Because without it, we're going to have a real problem producing efficiently and effectively and at a cost that'll allow us to earn a living. And we've gone for that in a couple of different countries across Europe. Stay tuned. We're expecting answers on those fronts imminently, in fact. And we very much believe that we're going to be in a position to say something before year end on that front.
Okay, that wraps it up. Well, it doesn't kind of wrap it up because this kind of ties in. You did a fundraise a few months ago, but I mean, I think one of the kind of reasons behind the fundraise was tied to this product, wasn't it, Ecovelex? Can you just give us a bit of, so it was 9.9 million, I think, you raised through a share placing. So can you talk about how difficult, I mean, I also write quite a lot about fintechs at the moment, and fintech bosses are, I guess like a lot of industries, talking about how it's a difficult fundraising kind of environment at the moment. Can you just give us a bit of colour on the fundraising and what the funds are going to be used for too?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I'll absolutely endorse what you said. It is an extremely difficult environment in which to raise funds at the moment. And that's particularly true for AIM-listed nano-cap companies. So I'll say, the growth end of the market, but inherent in that description is the implication that we're also talking about relatively small companies who are often loss-making, and the riskier but potentially more rewarding end of the market, as global economic pressures have mounted, and we've dealt with staggering inflation and a lot of economic growth related challenges or lack of growth related challenges. Investor money has flowed from the more risky propositions towards those that are much more safe haven. I mean, that's a well-worn path that your listeners are going to know very, very well. That has had a knock-on impact on investment in growth companies such as Eden. And so as a consequence of that, any company that isn't very, very well established with a very defined revenue stream that's very much more predictable and a long track record of consistent, growth, even if it's not, double-digit growth, but nevertheless, favorable growth. Anybody outside of that definition is going to find it a bit challenging, and we were no different. Now, we were supported very effectively by our brokers and by a good number of institutional and strategic investors. For us, it wasn't an easy process. Absolutely, investors are scrutinizing where their money goes more than they ever have. They're much more cautious than they have been in several years. And what that means is the burden of proof lies on us very, very clearly to ensure that people understand the investment story. So we brought on board a couple of new major institutions. We welcome back a good number of existing institutional and strategic investors, a number of whom increased their stake in the company through this fundraise. And what are we, to go to your question, effectively, what's the use of proceeds? Well, we're building really upon what we were able to achieve over the course of the last 3.5 years. So Eden has historically been a severely undercapitalized company. That's partially because of our presence on AIM, partially is because of the profile of the business, and that we are working in a highly regulated and therefore fairly slow industry. We don't see this sort of rapid growth without a significant investment of time and money. And so the visibility to shareholders in that return takes a little bit longer. And I'm pleased to say we're very much on track now. And we expect that 23 will be very much a decent year for us. But what I will say is that, with this fundraise in place, what we're able to do is continue to build on what we've been doing over the course of the last 3 years with expanding our product portfolio. So the seed treatment product is the first good example of that, Ecovelex. There's another development program that's reaching the stage of regulatory submissions, hopefully not in the too distant future. And that's an insecticide based, again, on the same type of active ingredients, but a completely new product category with a very significant addressable market that we're looking at. So, difficult environment, but we're very pleased to have been supported, nicely by our brokers and very nicely by strategic and institutional investors. And, we're now getting down to the business of deploying that money and investing in the business and moving things forward.
Okay, that's fine. So you had some time ago, you had your interims, which your 6 months, which I think showed your revenues are up from 1 million to 1.1 million, but you've got your imminently a trading update. So just give us a bit of indication, it'd be great, of how trading's gone since the, in the second half of the year then.
Yeah, I mean, we're very much tracking in line with what the market expectations are as defined by what was then Senkos is now Cavendish, in terms of the research note. So we're pleased with how things are going. We believe that the estimates that have been put out are reasonable and largely in line with our expectations. Stay tuned. This is actually a very busy time of year for us, although you might think that nobody's planting anything right now. Why would it be busy? It's actually, we're in full scale for the 24 campaign. So that's production, but also ensuring that the channels are filled with product and that we can meet demand for the 24 growing season. So there's still a fair bit to play for, but we are reasonably confident that we will satisfy market expectations, and then some possibly, but stay tuned on that front.
Okay, that's great. So I know last time you spoke to my boss, David, where you kind of talked more broadly about the market, but just give us some insight into how much farmers are embracing biopesticides or not. I mean, is it to what extent does it kind of demand a shift in their mindset? Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so the global pesticide industry, I think, is estimated to be about $58 billion a year within a couple of years. And a percentage of that, 11 billion of that $58 billion is represented by the biopesticide industry. And that's an industry that's growing at about 15% per year. It's absolutely correct to say that biopesticide as a concept, as a product category, and it's a very broad product category, are very much aligned with the regulatory direction of travel. And so, what we're doing, and just to maybe take 1 second and define what a biopesticide is, it's a fairly broad definition, but effectively, a biopesticide is a pesticide that has been based upon biological approaches to solving a given problem. And so that can mean lots of different things. But in any case, I think it's absolutely correct to say that the biopesticide segment of the overall pesticide industry is the most significant in terms of growth, rapid growth, expansion, and that general category is considered by the industry to be, the most dynamic of any at the moment. Within biopesticides, of course, you have organic pesticides as well, and our first two products are allowed as inputs for organic agriculture. Organic is a slightly different thing. Just because you have an organic product doesn't mean it's a biopesticide, and just because you have a biopesticide doesn't mean it's organic. So it's a slightly different but aligned definition in a sense. And I think it's right to say, and I touched on this a little bit earlier, the way growers are looking at solving their problems today is quite different than it was 10 years ago. 10 years ago, it would have been to say, right, we need a conventional chemistry to tackle this fungal pathogen, and we're going to use X, and it's going to deliver me 98% efficacy against that target. There are all kinds of potential issues with conventional chemistry. Not all conventional chemistry is bad, certainly, by any stretch of the imagination. And in fact, conventional chemistry remains a really useful tool. But what we're bringing to the market are products that are truly sustainable, that have very high levels of efficacy, and that in some cases are excellent partners for conventional chemistry. So I'd say that that's probably the best I can do in terms of defining overall the context of what we're doing. I think the main point really is that we lie in the direction of travel for regulators, and I think we expect to see in the future the vast majority of the industry switching over to a more biological approach.
Okay, and I'm going to highlight my ignorance here. So you hear a lot about kind of autonomous robots and kind of spot sprayers. So how does that kind of work hand in glove with biopesticides? Or
yeah, absolutely. No, I mean, more let's say, ag tech approaches to growing, using the power of AI, to use an overall overused expression, but nevertheless using more sophisticated techniques to targeting disease, to targeting pests. You have a situation where growers in France, for example, across many very high value vineyards have been using for many years actually drones to assess plant vigor. So understanding areas in the vineyard, for example, that might be the most susceptible to disease, and then targeting those based on real-time measurements of how the crops are actually doing. It's a real area for exciting growth, and biopesticides fit in. The application technologies and a lot of the let's say computer-driven approaches to farming are very much the tools that the farmer use, but then there has to be something that's powering those tools, and what's powering those tools is sustainable chemistry from products like ours.
Okay, that's great. And last question, just going back to Ecovelex. So this is from my understanding, your third product. Can you just talk about? Will this be potentially wise? Is this going to be the biggest product, or is it difficult to? I guess it's difficult to gauge at this time. It's not had regulatory approval.
It certainly could be, yes. And this goes to an underlying question. I won't get into a lot of detail unless you're wanting me to. But the addressable market for a product is really defined by what's on its label, and the label is literally physically that label that is applied to the container that a product is in, and that label gives a farmer all kinds of information. It's not a simple label; they're normally multiple pages, and what it'll tell you is what kind of equipment you need to use, and what kind of protective equipment, et cetera, et cetera. But what it also says is you may use this product on this crop for this specific reason, right? And so when we look at the overall industry and we look at the overall seed treatment industry, for example, which is estimated to be about $12.5 billion within a couple of years dollars, that's not really the market that we're going for. That would give people a really misinformed perception of what the overall opportunity is, because although the seed treatment industry is vast and is growing very, very rapidly, what's important is with Ecovelex, we're initially targeting bird repellency on maize. And so, when we define the addressable market there, what we're saying is, bird repellents on maize, that market is X, and we're hoping to achieve a given percentage of that. So broadly speaking, we see that market across Europe and the UK, across a whole range of different crops being, roughly 40 million or so. Now, the addressable market for Ecovelex is a bit more narrow than that. We see this potentially translating into roughly just short of 4 million euros per year in terms of revenue. That's with the anticipated label. And then, of course, we're working actively with Corteva today to broaden that label to include new crop targets. And by the way, there might be some additional functional benefits derived from Ecovelex, and that's something that we're looking at now, in that product may perform and deliver additional benefits beyond just bird repellency. But there's a lot more work to do before we can say that.
Okay, right, that's great, Sean. You've been very eloquent and very informative, and we're really pleased you've taken time out to come back to talk to us. So that's the Future Food Finance podcast, and my name is John Reynolds.